In 1959, the media discovered the Nation of Islam.
While city officials, state agencies, white liberals, and sober-minded Negroes stand idly by, a group of Negro dissenters is taking to street corner stepladders, church pulpits, sports arenas, and ballroom platforms across the United States to preach a gospel of hate that would set off a federal investigation if it were preached by Southern whites.
Lou Lomax, a reporter I'd never heard of, came to my office, told me about something called the Black Muslims. I'd never heard of them. Would we be interested in doing a broadcast, a documentary about them? I suggested that, yeah, we might. Let's learn more about them. One of the conditions of our doing the broadcast, he said, was they will not talk to a white reporter.
This is the first time I think my color has ever been in my favor rather than against me, but on the whole, I would say that this assignment was a little rough.
Assigned a white camera crew, Lomax filmed this rally in Washington, D.C. The program included a performance of a play by Louis X called The Trial, in which whites are tried for their offenses against blacks.
I charge the white man, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, with being the greatest murderer on earth. I charge the white man with being the greatest liar on earth. I charge the white man with being the greatest troublemaker on earth. So therefore, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I ask you, bring back a verdict of guilty as charged.
When Lou Lomax came back with a film of the rally, the Black Muslim rally, I was simply stunned. I mean, here was this auditorium overflowing, thousands of people, about an organization I knew nothing about. I found it difficult to credit when I saw it.
Have you ever been accused, sir, of preaching hate?
Yes.
Do you think you are preaching hate?
No.
What are you preaching, sir? Truth?
They call Mr. Muhammad a hate teacher because he makes you hate dope and alcohol. They call Mr. Muhammad a black supremacist because he teaches you and me not only that we're as good as the white man, but better than the white man. Yes, better than the white man. You are better than the white man. And that's not saying anything. That's not saying, you know where just to be equal with him. Who is he to be equal with? You look at his skin. You can't compare your skin with his skin. While your skin look like gold beside his skin. You find that old pale thing laying out in the sun, trying to get to look like you. That old pale thing.
In 1963, Malcolm X became national spokesman for the Nation of Islam.
You find them using man pain, trying to look like you. That old pale thing.
I was standing on the island there, looking at him, and my friend said, I'm going back to the office, we're going back. And I said, I'm going to stay because I like the rain. It was this kind of quiet drizzle that was happening there.
Hope you're not getting too wet.
And I looked up and looked around, determined not to look at him, determined not to listen. But he started to talk, and I found myself more and more listening to him. And I began to nod my head and say, yeah, that's right, that makes sense.
You don't have any dope for airplanes bringing drugs into this country. The white man brings it in. The white man brings it to Harlem. The white man makes you a drug addict. The white man then puts you in jail when he catches you using drugs. In a vicious cycle of poverty, of ignorance, of apathy, of disease, and of death. And they have these old Uncle Tom Negro leaders coming to Harlem telling you and me that times are getting better. Your times will never get better until you make them better.
When he came off the stage, I jumped off the island, walked up to him, and of course when I got to him, the bodyguards, moved in front. And he just pushed them away, and I went in front of him and extended my hand and said, I liked some of what you said. I didn't agree with all that you said, but I liked some of what you said. And he looked at me, held my hand in a very gentle fashion, and says, one day you will, sister.
As his reputation grew, Malcolm X began to write a book with Alex Haley.
When I began to interview Malcolm for the book that would later be called The Autobiography of Malcolm X, he would talk about the greater glories of Mr. Elijah Muhammad, his leader, and about the Nation of Islam, and there was nothing else he would talk about. And finally, I began very delicately as I could to say to him, Mr. Malcolm, this book is to be about you. So I know about them. You've told me. I've written with you about them. But we need now to go into your life. And he would always get first testy about it, and then he got distinctly annoyed about it, and finally he would get angry. I said, Mr. Malcolm, could you tell me something about your mother? And I will never, ever forget how he stopped, almost as if he was suspended like a marionette. And he said, I remember the kind of dresses she used to wear. They were old and faded and gray. And then he walked some more. And he said, I remember how she was always bent over the stove, trying to stretch what little we had. And that was the beginning, that night, of his walking. He walked that floor until just about daybreak.
Largely ignoring Elijah Muhammad, the media focused on Malcolm X, contrasting him with Martin Luther King Jr.
And it is a message which says that I am convinced that the most potent weapon available to oppress people, yes, sir, as they struggle for freedom and justice, is the weapon of nonviolence. Yeah. Amen. We're nonviolent with people who are nonviolent with us. But we are not nonviolent with anyone who is violent with us.
Malcolm X represented a different brand of leadership. Many of us that grew up in the South had been deeply influenced by the church, by the preaching of black ministers, but also by the message, the philosophy, the teaching of Martin Luther King Jr., the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence. We saw Malcolm as someone, in a sense, from the outside, coming from the North, to tell us that was a different way, a different approach. And I think many of us in the South had some reservations about it.
Martin and the regular civil rights leaders were presenting to America our best face, our nonviolent face, our desire to be included into American society. And we wanted to show the world that we had no evil intentions against anybody. We just wanted to be included. But they also understood that America, in spite of our reassurances, would be frightened and hesitant to open the doors to black folks. So Malcolm, as the outsider, as the man they thought represented the possibilities of violence, was the counter that they could use. They would say to the powers that be, look, here's Martin Luther King and all these guys, we are nonviolent. Now, outside the door, if you don't deal with us, is the other brother. And he ain't like us.
One white man named Lincoln supposedly fought the Civil War to solve the race problem, and the problem is still here. And then another white man named Kennedy came along running for president and told Negroes what all he was going to do for them if they voted for him, and they voted for him, 80%. He's been in office now for 3 years, and the problem is still here. When police dogs were biting black women and black children and black babies in Birmingham, Alabama, that Kennedy talked about what he couldn't do because no federal law had been violated. And as soon as the Negroes exploded and began to protect themselves and got the best of the crackers in Birmingham, then Kennedy sent for the troops. And there was no, he didn't have any new law. When he sent for the troops, when the Negroes erupted, then he had at the time when whites were erupting.
In November 1963, John F. Kennedy was assassinated. In the midst of national mourning, Elijah Muhammad suspended Malcolm X for his comments on the president's death.